Welcome, everyone. Another episode of Financial 15, the show where we try to provide some knowledge, improve your finances, do all that in 15 minutes or less. You can see Kevin is ready to go. And today we're talking about Registered Education Savings Plans, RESP. Whether you have one set up for your kids or maybe you have one set up for your grandkids, lots of details. We're going to get through it. You're going to want to stick around.
Yeah, if you want to know more on any of these topics or anything else that we've done in the last little while, please visit us at our website at beckerorr.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel or like us on Facebook. We're in all three formats, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions you've got. Clint, why don't you start us off on what is an RSP? Or ESP, should I say?
Let's get into the Registered Education Savings Plans. There's lots of terminology here, lots of jargon. We're going to try to provide some of the basics and then go through some of the common questions that we get when it comes to RESPs. So the first part, RESP, some of the terms you need to know. The subscriber, that's the person that sets up the plan, the person that puts the money in. That person has to be a Canadian resident. And then the beneficiary would be, in most cases, the child, the one that the money is going to be saved for, the education we're going to pay for. That's the beneficiary. And then the big part here, this is kind of the attractive feature, the RESP. There's some government money on the table. There's some grants, Kevin. How do those work?
Yeah, basically the way the grants are is for the first $2,500 that you contribute in per child, as it were, you can get 20% free money from the government, as it were. So you'll get $500 for the first $2,500, up to a lifetime max of $7,200 per child. Now, you'll need the child's SIN number, as we mentioned, to get in there, but this is free money that you can utilize for the investment going forward. Also, they have the Canada Learning Bond, which is a little bit extra that can be added, but you have to have a income status that you meet and or are below underneath. We could describe an entire amount on this. So we just want to mention that casually in passing, but otherwise the CESG is the most important thing to look at.
That's right. The grant there, you mentioned it, you need the social insurance number. So once a child's born, once you apply for the SIN, once you have that number, you could start an RESP if you wanted to. You don't have to wait. And then the learning bond, won't go through it in too much detail, but you don't have to make any contributions to receive the learning bond. You simply have to have an RESP open and then make the application. If you meet the criteria, which is an income barrier, you have to be below that income, government just adds a little bit of extra money. Last point there, anything in an RESP grows on a tax-deferred basis. Your money, the government's money, all that gets invested, all of that can grow tax-deferred. So you don't pay any tax year to year on that money. That's an important point. It allows it to compound that much faster. There's a couple of types of plans here, three big ones, an individual RESP, a family RESP, and then one called a group RESP. We're not going to get into too much. It's not as common. There's a few more restrictions. The two most popular, the ones we see quite often, individual and family. What are the differences there, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, those are the two most popular. The group is fairly new as well to be able to deal with that. But again, we're not going to touch that at the moment. The individual RSP is basically set up for one person or one child in particular. So if you plan on having one, an individual is the way to go and start out that way. Individual plans also can be converted to family plans down the road if there are more children added. So the individual plan, basically everything goes in there. It can be a subscriber that is a parent, a grandparent, uncle, aunt, relation, or even a friend. This is important to know that there are a lot more people that can open for an individual RESP. Whereas the family plan is set up for more than one beneficiary. That would be multiple kids underneath that. But that has to be a relative, either a parent or grandparent. You do not have the same number of people that can contribute to it based on those sort of scenarios. And the beneficiary will be named as the children in that plan. And again, all these children can share the money that goes on. But we can talk about that in a bit. Is there anything else you wanted to add on plans, Clint?
Oh, that's perfect. And often we encourage folks to use the family plan. If there's more than one child in the family plan makes some sense, because if one doesn't go to school, there's the ability to share some of that money with the other kids, the other beneficiaries on the family plan. So often that's the one you see the most frequently. Some of the details here, and this is important, we're getting into the CESG, the Canada Education Savings Grants. Kevin already mentioned some of the details. Year to year, $2,500, you add that amount, government adds 20%. But let's say you miss a year, you can play catch up, but there are some restrictions on how you can do the catch up. You cannot do more than $5,000 in a year and get the government grant. So if you miss a couple of years, you can do a $5,000 contribution. Government will add 20%. That's a $1,000 grant. that will go into the account, and you can keep doing that $5,000 contribution until you're fully caught up. There's also a lifetime maximum of what you're allowed to add to the RESP, no more than $50,000 per child. And then this is a key part. We're going to get into some of the details, but once the calendar year part, which the beneficiary turns 18, no more government money. All the grants stop that year. So the year in which they turn 18, no more grants. And there's even some more detail there, Kevin, on what happens when they're 16 and when they're 17. You want to walk people through that?
Yeah, basically all the way up to 15, as long as you're contributed in there, or if you have contributed, then you're going to get the grant. But if you haven't started until the child's basically 15, at 16 and 17, the only way you're going to get grant money in those 2 years is if you've contributed at least $2,000 into the RESP per child that's gone in there, or you've had a minimum annual contribution of 100 made in previous 4 years. Now, that does not have to be previous consecutive. If you did it when they were 3, 6, 8, 12, that's enough contributions. You can put it in and go from there. So those are really special rules to notify, because anybody who's starting late, you have to know what you can do for catch-up. And as you've mentioned, the catch-up scenario is basically a 1-year catch-up. So as opposed to saying you want to dump 10 grand in and get 5 years worth of catch-up, you can't do it that way. The maximum they'll give you is just the 20% on a $5,000 contribution if you've missed years. So it's important to know how much you can contribute and how much time frame you've got to try and play catch up with all of that.
Yeah, so the government's really trying to restrict people at the last minute, saying, oh, we're not as planned as we'd like to be. The kid's about to go to university. Let's put a big lump sum in, and the government will give us 20% on that. That's really not how it works. They're trying to encourage people to plan to add on a regular basis, and then they get that 20% grant along the way. They don't want you to do a last-minute lump sum and get the 20% grant. That's really what all these rules are trying to tell you. Last-minute lump sums aren't going to get the big government grant. We'll move into some of the common questions here, Kevin. I'll tee up the first one for you, and this is key. We're getting that government grant money in there. We're putting our own money in there. What can you do with the money? What can it be invested in?
Well, an RESP is basically listed as a registered plan. So it basically has the same scenario that you get for an RRSP or a TFSA. Anything you can contribute into those plans, you can contribute into an RESP. So you can have stocks, bonds, mutual funds, any of these sort of scenarios that go on. Anything you can't contribute into a registered plan, same sort of rules. So it is more of an investment account as opposed to just a savings account. And that's important to know, because you do have the time frame for growth if you start early enough. And these are things that you want to have invested going forward, maybe not all in GICs, but something that can grow a little bit further. And it uses both your contributions as well as the government grant money to be able to deal with that.
And that's key. That's key. All the money gets invested, all of it gets compounded, and all of it goes towards an eventual education. That leads us right into the next question. What can the money be used for? And there used to be a little more of a strict definition of what would apply in terms of a university or a college, and no longer the case. You're going to culinary school, you're getting a trade, really anything that falls into that post-secondary banner would be applicable. You need proof of enrollment, and then once the financial institution has that proof of enrollment, there's a large justification of expenses. It can go towards books, it can go towards travel, it can go towards living expenses, it can go towards tuition, really anything that would help out with the attainment of that education. So it's a more open idea of what the money can be used for. If they're in a post-secondary program, you've got proof of they're in a post-secondary program. Any expenses related to that can essentially be covered. Did I miss something there, Kevin?
No, basically you're right in post-secondary, but they do have to be registered either part-time or full-time. And there are requirements for what that is. Part-time is usually considered a certain number of courses, whereas full-time is sort of, 15 credit hours of what it is or more, anything below that. But you have to have at least one course to be able to qualify. You can't just sign up, register, drop everything, and we're going to give you all the money. So other than that, everything else you said was correct. And it can basically be used for almost anything.
That's right. And then a key point here, we're talking about all the benefits. We can't forget there's going to be some taxation. I'll let you start off here, Kevin. How is this going to be taxed?
Yeah, well, tax basically the way it comes out is that it's done in basically 3 buckets. So you've got the post-secondary education payment, you've got the ESP bucket, which is basically a combination of any of the growth that this portfolio has made, as well as the government money. Now, the government money in the growth, if it's taken out, is taxed in the hands of the beneficiary. So that'll be the child going to school. Whereas the post-secondary education payments, that is basically your contribution room that went in. Since it's already after-tax money that went in, it is not taxed on the way out. So depending on how much you take out, we'll decide what the tax factors go into. So that is if the child's going to go to school, then the more you take out of the EAP as it's listed, or education assistance payments, that is all going to go on the child's tax return. Anything PSE just basically comes out to you tax-free. These are important points to know for how you want to draw it out. If your child has basically been having a good job part-time or over summer, maybe we look at how much EAP we want them to pay if it's going to be taxed, but normally they're not in that taxable bracket. Anything you want to add on this point, Clint?
You covered it well. Simply, it's an important point, so I'm going to do a quick recap here. So you have three kind of buckets when it comes to the RESP. Think about three areas where the money goes. It's going to be your money, that's your contributions. There's going to be the government's money, all the grants, and then whatever growth you achieve. And then which one of those buckets comes out determines the taxation. So you have two kind of payments, like Kevin mentioned. You have the PSE, which is the post-secondary education payment. That's your money coming out completely tax-free. You've already paid tax on that. Then you have the second payment, the EAP, which is the education assistance payment, which is the growth and the government grant. That is taxed. And like Kevin says, tax in the hands of the beneficiary. I don't know about you, Kevin, but when I was in university, I did not have a very big income. So there was very little tax on any of those payments.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was in the same boat, but I look at my kids now at that point, and some of the summer jobs they've got have paid very well. And then last year is different because of the CERB that went on. So things I have to look at, but it's better taxed in their hands than in mine.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there is some tax efficiency there. That's the bottom line. Last question here. What happens if they don't go to school? So you do all this saving. Often you're going to be saving when they're quite young. They could be 1, 2, 3 years old. You don't know what's going to happen when they get to university age. What happens to the money if they don't go to school? One point here is if you have a family plan, remember earlier the types of plans, if you have a family plan and one child doesn't go to school within some limits, you can shift the money around. So if child number 2 goes to school, they can use some of that as extra funds. Also, what we encourage, if you are taking some of the money out, use those EAPs, use up some of the grants, use up some of the growth as much as you can, because any of the leftover, if there is some left over, if it's your contributions, that can come back to you completely tax-free. If there is some of the government grant left over, unfortunately, the government's going to take that back. That's meant for education. They don't go to school. The grant just goes back to the government. And then the last piece of the pie there, the growth, well, you can keep that. However, it's fully taxed. It hasn't been taxed yet. So if they don't go to school, that bit comes out. It's going to be taxed in your hands. There will be an extra 20% penalty, but there are a few ways you can shelter it. You can put it in your RSP if you have the room. There's also criteria that allow you to donate that to a university. So if there's a university you're an alma mater to and perhaps you want to give it to them, you can do that and it'll wash away the tax. It'll act as a donation. And last point here, that RESP can stay open until they're 35. So you have many years to figure it out to see if they go to school. So if by 25 they say, hey, school's not for me, but then they come back at 30 and decide they want to take a course, you could use it then. You don't have to make the decision right away. You've got until the age of 35 for the beneficiary to keep that plan open. Anything you want to add, Kevin?
Yeah, just 2 points. I mean, you covered everything well on that. The one thing is, as you mentioned, it's open to 35. You can make contributions into the plan until the child is 31. So that's something to know. Now, you're not getting any grant after the age of 18, but you can always put it in there because the growth that you put in will be tax sheltered to that point. And point number 2 is you mentioned that it can be shared, the Canada Education Savings Grant, between kids. Now, if you have, say, 3 kids and you've maxed out your RESP contributions for them and have the maximum 7,200 put in there, they can share anything in regard to the growth. They can share anything in regard to the principal you've put in, but they can share to a maximum of $7,200 of CESG grants. So if they use all that and the other 2 don't go to school, that money does have to go back to the government. They will take it. So other than those points, everything else I think we've covered fairly well. And like I said, this is just touching the surface. Each person's individual and how it's going to work for them.
Yeah, and if you have more questions, something we didn't cover, by all means, reach out to us. We have that part of our website, chatwithclintonandkevin.com. That's a portion of our website. I'd love to hear from you. Go to there, fill in the form, and we'll tackle all of your questions. Any parting comments, Kevin?
No, I think that's it. Now I got to go and start an RESP again for my grandkids if they ever come around. So I don't want them too soon, but let's wait until that time frame comes.
That's a good note to end on. So everyone stay safe. Take care.